There is a very specific type of comfort we all take in a crowded space. Like, think about walking down a busy city street at rush hour,
Right.
or sitting in an airport terminal, or even just, scrolling through an endless feed of millions of strangers online. You look around, and there's just this massive swirling ocean of human lives, all moving in completely different directions.
Yeah, it's the sheer scale of the noise, really. It acts as a kind of psychological buffer for us. We are insulated by the sheer volume of existence happening around us at any given second.
Exactly. It's chaotic, it's messy, and above all, it is random. And we rely heavily on that randomness. We tell ourselves, I am just a tiny, insignificant speck in a universe governed by pure, unfeeling entropy.
It's very comforting.
It is. There is a bizarre, deeply ingrained safety in that. If everything is random, then nobody is paying attention to you. You can just blend in.
Right, you're safely hidden in the background noise.
Yeah, you can trip on the sidewalk or buy a weird snack at 2 a.m. or have a quiet moment of sadness in your car, and it just doesn't matter because the universe is too busy to care.
But that is a protective illusion. We desperately need to believe in a chaotic universe because, well, the alternative is fundamentally terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
The idea that the chaos is actually highly organized and that the noise is just a cover for something watching that strips away every defense mechanism we have as modern humans.
Because if you aren't hidden in the noise.
Then you are exposed.
Oh.
And if you are exposed, you can be hunted.
Which brings us to the incredibly unsettling source material we are taking a deep dive into today.
Yeah, this one is rough.
It really is. We are looking at excerpts from a YouTube video transcript uploaded by a channel called The Midnight Curator. The video is titled, "They Didn't Find Me, They Chose Me."
A very telling title.
Right. I read this victim's account last night, and I have to admit, it kept me up staring at the ceiling. It is a highly detailed clinical account of a profound psychological and physical hijacking. It is the story of a person who realizes the noise of the universe was a complete lie.
It is terrifying, absolutely. But as I was reviewing the material, I actually think reading it as a traditional horror story or just, the diary of a victim is looking at it upside down.
Wait, really? Upside down how?
Well, if you look closely at the structure of what happens to this person, this isn't just a diary. It is an instruction manual.
An instruction manual. Okay, let's unpack this. What do you mean by that? Like an instruction manual for who?
I mean that instead of looking at this through the terrified eyes of the person being taken, we should reverse engineer the playbook. Let's look at it from the predator's point of view.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, let's decode this narrative from the viewpoint of the organization leader, the collective consciousness that is orchestrating this entire nightmare. Because from their perspective, this text outlines the exact step-by-step methodology of a total human takeover.
I love that. I mean, I hate it, but I love that approach for this deep dive. So instead of just being scared of the monster, we are going to look at the monster's blueprints.
Exactly.
You're going to map out how an entity takes a free, autonomous individual living their normal life and completely transitions them into a fully assimilated, compliant tool of an expanding system.
Precisely. And as we break down these mechanisms, the chilling core premise to keep in mind is that to this organization, randomness is an absolute myth.
Right.
The entropy we take comfort in, to them, it is a meticulously monitored script. They rely on our belief in chaos to operate in plain sight.
So, as you are listening to this right now, maybe you are driving, maybe you are doing the dishes, or maybe you are just sitting in the dark. I want you to really consider something. How would you react if you discovered that your entire life, every random coincidence, every major milestone, every supposed choice you ever made was actually a carefully engineered setup?
It's a staggering thought.
It really messes with your head. So let's start right at the beginning. How does an organization like this even pick a target? Let's look at their architecture of illusion, their surveillance phase.
This is the foundation of their entire operation. The text notes that the narrator used to take comfort in the scale of the noise, in millions of lives intersecting without design.
Just like we were saying earlier.
Exactly. But from the perspective of the collective, this world is not a chaotic mess. It is, to use their phrasing, a map of potential harvests. They view human society as an agricultural grid.
An agricultural grid. That implies they're waiting for something to, ripen. But what exactly is the illusion of safety doing for them? Why is it so crucial that the victim believes in entropy?
Because entropy provides the perfect camouflage for systematic manipulation. If a subject believes that their dropped coffee, their missed train, or their chance encounter with a new friend was just bad luck or coincidence, They will never look for the strings pulling them.
Oh, that makes total sense. If you think it's just the universe being random, you don't look up.
Right. The organization's initial methodology relies entirely on the subject remaining completely unaware that they are existing inside a controlled artificial environment.
So they are just watching.
They monitor thousands of people simultaneously from the dark, letting the subjects believe they're wandering freely in a forest, when actually they are in a highly curated terrarium.
But they aren't just monitoring everyone equally, right? And this is the detail in the text that actually made me stop and reread it several times.
The selection criteria.
Yes. The expert in the facility later explains that their transmission, their assimilation process, is highly selective. It only works on those who have been, quote, listening for the signal their entire lives without realizing it.
That is the key phrase.
Okay, wait. Let me try to wrap my head around this. What does it actually mean to unconsciously listen for a signal your whole life? How does a predatory organization even measure or identify that kind of psychological vulnerability?
That is the brilliant, terrifying mechanism of their selection process. They aren't looking for physical traits. They aren't looking for socioeconomic status or a specific demographic. They are scanning for a specific psychological frequency.
The vibe check from hell.
Basically, yeah. Listening for the signal implies a deep underlying sense of alienation.
Alienation, like just feeling lonely.
Deeper than just loneliness. It is a fundamental existential disconnect from the chaotic world around them.
Oh, so not just not having friends.
Right.
Sure.
It is a person who is going through the motions of life, going to work, paying bills, having conversations, but internally, there is a quiet, persistent waiting, a feeling that they don't quite belong to the entropy everyone else accepts.
Like they're an alien on their own planet.
Exactly. They feel that there should be an order, a design, or a purpose that is currently missing. They are psychologically primed for structure, even if they don't consciously know it.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm getting this. It's like, imagine a sonar ping going out from a submarine, sweeping the ocean floor.
Okay, I'm with you.
Most people are like the jagged rocks or the coral reefs. The sound waves hit them and scatter in a million different directions because their minds are chaotic, fully integrated into the messy noise of the world.
Right. The signal just dissipates.
Exactly. But this alienated person, this specific type of target, they are like a perfectly smooth, perfectly polished mirror sitting on the ocean floor.
Oh, I see where you're going.
When the sonar hits them, it doesn't scatter. It reflects the signal right back, pure and clear. The organization is just sending out these massive silent sonar pings across humanity, waiting for that perfect echo to bounce back.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. It acts exactly like active sonar. And when they get that clean reflection back, they don't strike immediately.
They don't.
No. And that is where we see the sheer operational stamina of this collective. Once they identify the reflective surface, the alienated mind, they begin the 20-year script.
The 20-year script. Man, this is what shifts the narrative from a creepy stalker story into absolute crushing existential dread for me.
The timescale is immense.
It is, because when the narrator eventually sees the footage of their life, it is not just recent surveillance. They aren't just looking at footage from a camera hidden across the street a week ago.
No, it goes all the way back.
The footage shows a childhood park. It shows the interior of their very first apartment. It shows angles captured from inside the target's own bedroom over 20 years.
This timescale entirely dwarfs human attention spans, and it reveals the nature of the predator. They are not impatient. They operate with a glacial, terrifying certainty.
Glacial is the right word. It's so slow and methodical.
And capturing angles inside a bedroom over 2 decades means the organization has been a silent roommate for the subject's entire cognitive and emotional development.
God, that makes my skin crawl.
But the real horror, as we analyze their playbook, is that this wasn't just passive observation.
Right. The text says that every major event in the narrator's life was a, quote, subtle nudge designed to bring me to this center point.
Exactly. They aren't just watching the rat in the maze. They are dynamically, silently shifting the walls of the maze to ensure the rat ends up exactly where they need it, exactly when the psychological window of vulnerability opens widest.
It's like realizing your entire life path was just an algorithm making decisions for you. Like, I used to think I consciously chose to move to Chicago in my 20s.
But maybe you didn't.
Right. In this scenario, it would turn out the algorithm just wanted me to buy a specific winter coat that I'd only find in a shop near a specific intersection, so I'd bump into a specific person.
Yes.
It's dark humor, but that's essentially the scale of the manipulation. It's surveillance capitalism turned into supernatural bureaucratic fate.
That is a very apt parallel. Algorithms today already try to predict and gently nudge our behavior, what we buy, what we read, how we vote.
We're already used to it on our phones.
Exactly. This organization has just perfected that concept to an absolute degree, applying it to the very trajectory of a human soul.
Wow.
If we look at this from the leader's playbook, this is supreme resource management. You don't force a subject to become vulnerable with brute force because brute force creates resistance.
People fight back if you push them.
They do. Instead, you gently and invisibly guide their life path over 20 years so that the vulnerability arrives naturally, organically.
Which completely destroys the very concept of autonomy. You look back at your life, you think about your triumphs, your heartbreaks, the moments you thought you bravely chose to take a new job or end a relationship.
And none of it was yours.
To realize that none of that was your choice, that your entire concept of free will never actually existed. It was all just a series of engineered bumpers in a bowling alley, keeping your ball perfectly in the lane they wanted.
And cultivating that specific realization is essential to breaking the subject down. The realization of determinism, the undeniable proof that you have no free will, is the ultimate weapon, which we will see deployed later.
It's just so bleak.
But at this point in the playbook, the trap has been set. The 20 years of subtle nudges have brought the subject to the precise moment of readiness. The radio receiver is perfectly tuned, the room is quiet, and the organization is finally ready to broadcast the signal.
Okay, so they've spent 2 decades quietly watching this person, nudging them into position. But watching isn't capturing.
No, it is not.
How do you go from passive surveillance to actually dragging someone out of their house in the middle of the night without triggering their fight or flight response?
This brings us to phase 2, the execution of the trap, the psychological trigger. And it all starts with a simple text message.
It is the middle of the night, the phone lights up, no name, no number, just 3 words.
You're ready now. I have to say, the brevity of that is what makes it so chilling. 3 words end the illusion of a chaotic universe.
It's incredibly efficient.
But here's what I need to understand, because this is where the mechanics get really wild. How does a simple text message physically hijack a human being? To understand how it works, we have to look at the intersection of Pavlovian conditioning and neuro-linguistic programming, but scaled up over 20 years.
Okay, so heavy psychological conditioning.
Exactly. From the collective's operational standpoint, efficiency is paramount. The text notes that before the conscious mind could even start rationalizing the message, a deeper, older part of the brain had already accepted the instruction.
The older part of the brain. So they are entirely bypassing the frontal lobe, the part of us that uses logic, that questions things, that says, hey, who is texting me at 3 a.m.? This is super sketchy.
Exactly. The frontal lobe is where the ego lives, where skepticism lives. The organization knows they cannot negotiate with the frontal lobe.
So they just go around it.
They don't even try to negotiate.
Yeah.
They've spent 20 years conditioning this subject. The phrase, "you're ready now," is not an invitation.
It's a command.
It is the culmination of all those subtle nudges. It is a psychological anchor, like how a specific smell can instantly transport you back to a childhood memory before you even realize what you're smelling. This phrase has been wired directly into the subject's primitive reptilian brain.
Oh, that is wild.
It operates as an administrative override code. The moment it was perceived, the conscious mind is suddenly locked out of the system.
And the text perfectly illustrates that lockout, because a second message arrives immediately after containing an address. And the narrator's conscious mind tries so hard to fight back.
It does. It tries to resist.
They hit delete on the message. They tell themselves, I am staying in bed, I am locking the doors, I am ignoring the world. The conscious logical I is screaming in panic, trying to assert control, trying to activate the fight or flight response.
But the tragedy and the triumph of the organization's method is that the conscious mind no longer possesses the steering wheel. The narrator says, an hour later, I was standing in a gravel lot miles from my home. I listened to the rhythmic crunch of my own footsteps, watching my legs move with a steady mechanical confidence that my mind was screaming to stop.
That phrase, steady mechanical confidence, is so deeply unnatural.
It implies programming.
Yeah, it implies that the body knows exactly what it is doing, that it has a purpose, even while the conscious mind is completely paralyzed in sheer terror.
This is the biological horror of the hijack. The organization's signal routes straight to the motor functions,
Skipping the brain completely?
while skipping the conscious will entirely. The subject is sleepwalking, but they are entirely awake. They're trapped behind their own eyes, watching their body get hijacked.
It is exactly like a computer virus.
How so?
Think about when a laptop gets infected with a deeply embedded piece of malware. Your operating system, which in this case is the conscious mind, the ego starts throwing up all these screaming, flashing warning pop-ups.
Oh, yeah.
Danger. Unauthorized access. Shutdown. But the virus doesn't care about the pop-ups. It ignores the screen completely because it has already bypassed the software and hijacked the physical hardware on the motherboard.
That makes perfect sense.
Your operating system can scream all at once, but the camera light turns on anyway. The hard drive starts wiping itself. You are just watching the screen, completely powerless to stop the machine from executing the malicious code.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The narrator is locked inside the operating system, watching the hardware of their own body march miles away from home. They have been reduced to a passenger in their own physical form.
A hostage in your own body.
Exactly. And by severing the connection between the subject's will and their motor functions, the collective begins to systematically crack the foundation of the individual's identity.
Because if you cannot control your own hands and feet, who are you? What is the point of having an identity if it has zero agency in the physical world?
Precisely. This physical usurpation is a necessary precursor to the mental assimilation that happens next. You have to break the body's reliance on the mind before you can replace the mind itself.
And what a deeply lonely walk that must be. Hearing the crunch of the gravel, feeling the cold night air, knowing that your legs belong to someone else now.
The sheer helplessness of it.
Yeah, the sheer helplessness of being carried by your own feet toward a destination you just deleted from your phone. But the mind is still fighting. It is still screaming in that gravel lot, which means the organization's job isn't done yet. They have the body, but they need the soul.
The physical delivery of the asset to the facility is merely the transition point. Now, we enter phase 3, where the psychological breaking point finalizes the assimilation.
As the narrator approaches the building, we get this incredibly eerie, mundane description. The building looks normal, even welcoming. The lights are on, the door is unlocked.
Nothing overtly threatening.
Right. But the narrator feels as if the structure itself has been, quote, holding its breath.
It is not some dark, Gothic dungeon with chains on the wall. It is banal. It looks like an office building or a distribution warehouse. It is the mundane architecture of bureaucracy.
Just a normal, boring building.
And inside, it is full of people, sitting, standing, but wrapped in this heavy, unnatural stillness. And then comes the greeting. A man looks up and says, "You came."
Not a villainous monologue, no cackling, just "you came."
The narrator describes it as having the flat finality of a box being checked off a list.
Which is so much worse.
It reinforces the collective's perspective, which is crucial for our analysis. To the organization, this is not a dramatic abduction. It is standard operating procedure.
Just another day at the office.
It is Tuesday. An asset was pinged, the asset arrived, the inventory is updated. The lack of malice makes it infinitely more terrifying.
Why does the lack of malice make it scarier?
Well, malice would imply a relationship between two individuals, a predator and prey, a rivalry almost. But bureaucracy implies a system processing a raw material.
You're just an ingredient on a conveyor belt. It is clinical. So the man points toward this massive flickering wall of surveillance monitors. And this is where the sheer scope of the operation is visualized.
The map of harvests.
Yes, each screen is tracking a single person walking, eating, sitting alone. It is the map of potential harvests we talked about earlier. Thousands of people completely unaware they are being scrutinized from the dark.
And then the organization deploys its most devastating weapon. The entire array of screens blinks in perfect synchronization. The strangers vanish. And suddenly, the massive wall of monitors is filled entirely with footage of the narrator.
The 20 years of surveillance, the childhood park, the first apartment, the bedroom angles, it is all laid out bare, running simultaneously.
This is the critical moment in the leader's playbook. This is the mechanics of total assimilation. Because up until this point, the narrator is still protesting. Their mind is still fighting.
They are trying to back away.
right? They try to physically back away, shouting, "I am not part of this."
You.
They are desperately clinging to their individual identity, trying to assert boundaries.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you here.
Sure, go ahead.
This is where my own logic was pushing back hard against the text. If I walked into a strange building in the middle of the night entirely against my will, and I suddenly saw a giant wall of monitors playing my entire life, including footage from inside my bedroom, I wouldn't just give up and let my ego shatter.
You think you would fight?
My adrenaline would spike to absolute maximum. I'd start throwing chairs at the screens. I would fight like a cornered animal. Why doesn't the fight or flight instinct kick in here? Why do they just submit to the recognition?
That is a very natural human reaction to imagine. From the comfort of your own autonomous life, that makes sense. But you have to view it through the lens of a psychological concept called learned helplessness, compounded by the utter destruction of their reality.
Learned helplessness, like the animal studies.
It's exactly. In the late 1960s, Martin Seligman conducted famous, albeit controversial, experiments with the dogs. When the dogs learned that shocks were completely inescapable and random, they eventually stopped trying to jump the barrier to escape.
They just gave up.
Even when the barrier was lowered later, they just lay down and accepted the shock. Their brains learned that their actions had zero impact on their environment.
So you're saying the narrator realizes their entire life has been an inescapable box?
Yeah.
That throwing a chair wouldn't matter?
Worse than that, when you look at a wall of monitors that proves undeniably that an external entity has been writing your story for 20 years, it doesn't just trigger a learned helplessness, it triggers an ego death.
An ego death. Explain that.
To maintain an individual ego, to have the desire to throw a chair, you must believe that you are the author of your own story. You must believe your actions matter. When the people in the room hear the narrator's denial, they laugh.
Right, the laugh.
But it's not a cruel, mocking laugh. It is described as a dry, collective sound that made my denial feel small and irrelevant.
Small and irrelevant. So the sheer scale of the manipulation just crushes the ego.
Exactly. That dry, collective sound is the friction of a massive, unstoppable machine encountering a tiny speck of dust. If every major event, every heartbreak, every triumph was a subtle nudge designed to bring you to this exact room, then the individual identity you thought you had is exposed as a fiction.
It never really existed.
A puppet cannot maintain its delusion of autonomy when it is forced to look up and clearly see the strings, the hands holding them, and the 20-year script the puppeteer has been reading from. If the system built your reality, fighting it is like a character in a novel trying to punch the author. It is mathematically impossible.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. The quote from the text is, "Recognizing the trap, is the trap." You can't deny involvement in a system that literally built your consciousness.
Just can't. The logic loop closes on itself.
Once you see the undeniable proof of the design, your reality collapses, and the only reality left to step into is theirs. The mind stops fighting the body because the mind realizes there is nothing left to fight for. The individual I simply ceases to exist.
Yet is the ultimate elegance of their playbook. The assimilation doesn't require physical restraints, handcuffs, or brainwashing drugs. It requires truth. The organization weaponizes the absolute truth of their control. By proving the illusion of the victim's autonomy, they eradicate it permanently.
And honestly, this next part is what makes my stomach drop. Because losing your identity is horrible, but the organization's playbook doesn't end with a lobotomized victim staring blankly at a wall.
No, they have a purpose for them.
They don't just want passive followers. Now that the ego is broken, we move into phase 4, the forced conscription, the weaponization process, the transition from passive victim to active asset.
They need a return on their 20-year investment.
Right. So the wall of monitors cuts down to just a single screen. It shows a man sitting in his car, mindlessly scrolling through his phone in the glow of a street lamp. Just a totally normal, isolated moment of modern life.
Someone hidden in the noise.
And the man next to the narrator just nods at the screen and says, "Your turn."
Your turn. 2 words that reveal the true, hideous nature of the collective's life cycle. The narrator explicitly states that the horror here isn't death. It is forced conscription.
They're immediately forced to steal someone else's agency, exactly as theirs was just stolen moments ago. The narrator calls themselves the active catalyst for the next infection.
It's a viral spread.
It feels exactly like a vampire myth to me, but entirely stripped of the romance, the castles, and the blood. It is a psychological, bureaucratic vampirism.
Bureaucratic vampirism.
Yeah. You aren't just bitten in the dark. You are bitten, dragged into the fluorescent lights of the DMV, handed a clipboard, and instantly forced to bite the next person on a meticulously curated spreadsheet.
Bureaucratic vampirism is a brilliant way to describe it. It is a multi-level marketing scheme of trauma and control. And structurally, it is a masterstroke by the organization.
Because it forces growth.
Why rely on a few dedicated recruiters when you can force every single harvested asset to immediately multiply the collective? It ensures exponential, unbroken growth. But more importantly, from a psychological standpoint, forcing the victim to become the perpetrator is the final seal on the assimilation.
Wait, how so? Why is doing the recruiting the final seal?
Because it forces the ultimate cognitive dissonance and then resolves it in favor of the collective. The internal experience of this forced conscription is agonizing.
I can't even imagine.
The narrator says their individual mind felt like it was retreating into a small dark corner of my skull as their hand reached out and took the microphone. That retreat is the final death rattle of the individual consciousness.
It's just hiding from what it's doing.
It is trapped in the furthest corner of its own mind, forced to watch as its hijacked body prepares to inflict the exact same trauma on another innocent person. You are not allowed to be a martyr. You are forced to become the executioner.
Good.
And once you commit the act, your mind has to rationalize it. And the only way to rationalize it without going completely insane is to fully accept the identity of the collective.
And the execution itself is terrifyingly simple. It doesn't take physical violence. The narrator says, the destruction of a life is handled with a single spoken sentence. One breath into the microphone is enough to override everything that person thinks they are.
Because the 20 years of grooming has already been done on this new target in the car. The explosive charges have been planted for decades. The narrator's just being forced to push the detonator.
So the narrator looks at the men on the screen. They see the quiet, private world he thinks he lives in. They feel the weight of the command waiting in their throat. And then the words leave their mouth. You're ready now.
And how do those words feel to them?
They note that the words were spoken with a calm precision. They sounded alien, but they felt perfectly right.
Perfectly right. That is the indicator that the cognitive dissonance has been resolved. The psychological assimilation is cementing. The individual horror is being replaced by the collective's operational efficiency. The asset is successfully functioning as designed.
Which catapults us into Phase 5, the final sequence of the playbook, the expanding cycle of control. The transition from victim to predator is about to be completed. We are now tracking the real-time effect of this verbal virus taking hold on the new target.
The man in the car hears the words, "You're ready now," and instantly his mundane reality shatters. His frantic thumb motion on the phone stops. He freezes. He becomes a statue.
The exact same motor override that hijacked the narrator an hour earlier is now hijacking this man. The verbal virus has successfully hacked his nervous system.
And then, the physical manifestation of the collective consciousness finally shows itself. On the screen, the man in the car slowly raises his head. He looks straight into the lens of whatever camera is recording him, a camera he never knew was there, and a subtle, unnatural smile curls at the corners of his mouth.
And here is the ultimate payoff, the terrifying climax of the entire text. The narrator realizes that their own face is mirroring that exact expression. They are smiling too.
The synchronized smile.
Yes. And they look around the room, and every single person in the facility is smiling the exact same way. It is a synchronized reaction of the collective.
The synchronization is the visual proof that the individual identity is definitively gone. If your facial expressions are no longer dictated by your own internal emotions, but by a network-wide command that fires simultaneously across hundreds of bodies, you are no longer a person. You are simply a node in a network.
Just a piece of hardware.
Exactly. The hardware has been fully integrated into the mainframe.
The I has completely dissolved into the we. The narrator says it clearly, my individual identity is gone, replaced by the predatory consciousness of the group. We have reached the end of the organization's playbook. The transition is complete.
And it culminates in the final, chilling thesis statement of the collective. The mantra that the narrator, who is now simply an indistinguishable part of the leader, delivers. We are no longer being chosen. We are the ones choosing.
Oh, that line. That line is so haunting because it perfectly encapsulates the shift we've been mapping out. 30 minutes ago, this person was a victim, crying out in denial in a gravel parking lot, stripped of their agency, chosen by a predator.
Right.
And now the perspective has completely inverted. They are the predator. They are the ones holding the map of potential harvests. They are the ones scanning the sonar for the next reflective mind.
It is the ultimate loss of humanity. To survive the trauma of being chosen, the individual self is annihilated, and the void is filled entirely by the collective's drive to choose the next victim. The cycle is closed and immediately begins again.
So, if we synthesize everything we just unpacked, stepping back from the blueprints of this organization, the sheer staggering efficiency of this collective is mind-bending.
It's flawlessly designed.
They don't use brute force. They use our own psychological defense mechanisms against us. They take our comfort in random entropy and use it as a smokescreen for 20 years of surveillance.
Yeah.
They use Pavlovian conditioning to turn our own motor functions into a cage. They weaponize the very realization of the truth to trigger learned helplessness and crush our ego, and then they instantly force us to perpetuate the cycle, stealing our agency to steal someone else's.
It is a flawless, self-replicating system of control. It thrives on the isolation and the hidden vulnerabilities of the modern world. It preys on the fact that we rely on the noise to feel safe.
And that brings us right back to you listening to this deep dive. Because it is so easy to feel safe in the noise, isn't it?
It really is.
It is so easy to hide in the millions of intersecting lives. To sit in your car at night or lie in your bed scrolling on a phone in the dark, assuming absolutely no one is paying attention to the quiet, private world you live in.
But if this organization's playbook relies entirely on identifying the harvest, if they only target those who have been unconsciously listening for the signal their entire lives, it forces a very uncomfortable question.
It really does.
What internal signals are you broadcasting right now in your quietest, most private moments? When the sonar pings you, do you scatter the noise or do you reflect it back?
Are you waiting for it?
Are you unconsciously waiting for something to break the entropy? And more importantly, if the collective is always monitoring the dark, waiting for a precise window of psychological vulnerability, who might be waiting for exactly this moment to decide that you are ready now?
On that incredibly unsettling note, I think we will leave it there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time. And hey, maybe double check your texts tonight.